Nice to see you all. I'm Phil Christianson. I'm Chief Product Officer at a company called Zurant. And you might be wondering, why is an IT software? So Zurant is an IT software management platform similar to something like a ServiceNow or a Halo. You might be wondering, why is IT software at a DevOps conference? So what I want to talk about today is when IT teams and dev teams come together, specifically during the incident management process. So interestingly enough, yesterday, we just finalized an acquisition of a company called ZenDuty. Perhaps anyone heard of ZenDuty in the room? Raise your hands. All right. So ZenDuty is a similar product suite in some ways to PagerDuty. You're going to get to hear from PagerDuty later today, and Fire Hydrant. There's a number of tools out there. So what I would like to tell you today is a little bit of a story of when these two worlds come together, when they collide. And I'm going to do it through a couple of examples from my past, and then talk a little bit about the software and what it's designed to do and to help in that scenario. So we'll go through a little intro, the evolution of IT and the evolution of DevOps as I see them. I'll tell you a little quick story from my past, and then we'll talk a little bit about incident management to wrap things up. As much as possible, I'm going to try and share some insights and ideas. This is not designed to be, I'm not a salesperson, I'm a product guy, but I do want to tell you about our product. So real quick, if we think about IT first, I know this is a room full of developers. If we think about IT, the evolution of IT looks something like this. You really have a lot of silos that developed over the years. IT started as a world that really focused on the help desk. You had people answering problems about broken computers, broken printers. This is where it came from. Eventually, IT teams started taking on infrastructure. You had a lot of on-premise infrastructure initially. Companies started moving that up into the cloud. So then you added in cloud infrastructure, more modern infrastructure. All of this really developed in a very siloed fashion in a lot of companies. And a lot of companies started adding IT ops teams to really glue it together and provide some sort of view across all of this to make sure that automation and best practices were used throughout the IT organization. So generally in an IT org, success was measured by what you see here. It was measured by speed of service, the volume of the queues that people are working through, cost of service, number of security breaches. IT teams got very good over time at delivering these services on time. They really focused on accountability. They focused on repeatability. Automation became a big part of IT. How do you make these repetitive tasks go away? How do you make them so that you don't have to do them again tomorrow? And compliance. IT teams are historically very good at compliance. They're the teams of all the teams in an org that are writing down what they did and keeping it in some sort of audit trail. I know maybe doesn't always resonate with developers, but IT teams got very good at that because they're the teams responsible when the ISO teams come and do the audits at an organization. Generally, this whole world was powered by and continues to be powered by ITSM software platforms like our own, like ServiceNow, et cetera. These tools were really custom built for everything I just described. In parallel to this, in DevLand, hopefully maybe more near and dear to the parts in this room, you had a similar world of silos being created over time. You obviously have engineers at organizations. When I first started, we had a dedicated QA team. I know a lot of that's getting merged together at different places. We even had a release engineering team. All they did was release code. They didn't write code. We had prod support teams who were these sort of like pseudo developers that actually went out and talked to customers. So you had a lot of different silos than dev teams as well. And similarly, you started to develop DevOps, what you guys do, looking across all of this, no matter what it hit, and thinking about the impact on the organization. Unlike IT, developers really measure their success in a different way. The world of development was very much and has been focused on impact. The agile methodology is all about the impact you're having, iterating, making sure you're shifting left into the business. You know the impact of what you're doing, and that really is above anything else. So to really get good at impact, development teams got really good at flexibility, adaptation. Every development team I've ever been a part of has redefined their flavor of agile. They've got different cadences. They've got different statuses. I think they know how to do things different than their other teams, because above any other goals, innovation was what drives development teams. And so you see a different set of what good looks like for development than you often do in IT teams. If I had to, I know I didn't do this for IT, but if I had to document some areas of that where development teams generally don't always do as great of a job at, or opportunity areas, predictability, I don't think is always paramount for development teams. If you're focused on impact at an organization, do you deliver it this week or next week or the week after is maybe a little less important. It's very easy for me to go to leadership and say, look, I need 3 more weeks, but it's going to be 10 times better. People generally are on board with that kind of thing. delivery time, compliance, who's been a part of engineering teams where you're cutting corners and you're not thinking about you're doing it necessarily always the right way. These were just not priorities generally for development teams like they have been historically for IT teams. And these tools should look familiar. Obviously, this is the tools that drive a lot of the dev space. Jira is obviously pretty ubiquitous, and especially in North America. You have Slack, you have tools like PagerDuty and ZenDuty responsible for a lot of the escalation and incident management side. So that's a little backdrop. What I want to talk mostly about is when these two worlds collide. And when these worlds collide, at least in my experience, is when there's a problem. When things blow up, when there's some sort of major incident in the field, you suddenly have a situation where those dev teams and all their best practices and skills need to come together and talk to IT teams, because the IT teams are generally the ones who are either managing the infrastructure or dealing with the war rooms. So let's talk about, I thought I'd step back. Before I worked at Zerent, I was a director at a large e-com company, which I won't share because we're recording this, but you can find it on LinkedIn, a large furniture e-com company in Boston. And I was responsible for pricing. And my teams were the teams that were setting all the prices on the website. We had millions of site SKUs on the website. We had a large data science practice that was responsible for attempting to figure out what the elasticity of demand for every one of those million of SKUs was and come up with the most optimal price so we can make the most money. Not always the most successful at that. But ultimately, our ecosystem looks something like this. I know it's probably a little hard to see on the screen, so I'll walk you through a little bit of it. I don't think this is dissimilar than if anyone's worked in e-com. On the far left, we had a data science crew that was doing all the things I just described. We had a pricing team that then took that information and figured out a way to store it and distribute it and recalculate it and do it fast. We were changing prices every single day based upon changing economics. We had an IT team in the middle that managed our infrastructure. So all of the servers that we used to get this information out to the internet was managed by the IT teams. And in the name of the game in e-commerce is speed. So you needed to get that data across the globe to every data center that hosted our software so that when people browsed the internet, they had lightning fast responses. So you had a lot of caching and a lot of this sort of technology there to make sure that was happening. We obviously had a UI team, as most companies would that are e-com. We had an advertising team. There was a huge amount of ad dollars being spent to drive traffic to our sites. And obviously, on the far, you have hopefully people shopping and putting things in their cart and bringing revenue to the organization. There's a small little Google piece up there too. Google lived in this ecosystem because we bought a lot of Google ads, and Google, to really validate the quality of their listings that they're providing to people, they'll crawl your website. It's a common practice in e-com. They'll come and they'll say, you told me that this couch is $100 on your ad that you bought from us. Are you really selling it for $100? And if they see that you're not, you click the ad and it's $150, they don't like that and they'll shut you down. So they spend a lot of time crawling e-commerce sites to make that happen. So one day this happened. Let me zoom in here. Oops, go back one. This is a chart, an actual chart from some revenue numbers. What you can see here is that revenue took a huge nosedive. This is actually after the fact. Sales basically stopped on Tuesday. And as is often the case, and I'll talk a little about before, we had all the most advanced observability platforms. We used Datadog. Who found this problem was the CFO. The CFO suddenly was like, holy crap, what's going on? Why have our numbers dropped through the floor? And the CFO basically yelled, and what do you do in these situations? You declare a SEV, of course. And you bring everyone into the war room, everybody and everybody's brother and everybody's manager and everybody's director. You get into the war room. And at least the company I worked for, in these situations, the IT ops team, and I'm curious if this is the same with you guys, the IT ops team was the team that was called on to be the incident commander in these situations. And I would argue the reason for that goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning. IT teams from the beginning have been built to fight fires. They've been probably one of the oldest orgs in your company that has had a 24/7 on-call rotation. That's how they started. They've had it from the beginning. Even as your development grew and your customer base grew, you may not need that till you get large enough. IT teams need that basically from the beginning. I'm sure every IT guy has dealt with some situation where the CEO calls them on a Saturday with a broken cell phone and needs you to drive it to their house. So these IT guys are very good at this, and this is how they've developed their organization. They're often also looked at as a neutral third party between development and the business. So they're good at it. And in this case, we declared a SEV. The IT incident commander was called to the room and called everyone to the war room. At least 6 different teams were involved, as I just talked about before. We didn't know what was going on at this point. So it was basically anybody involved in the order management process called to the war room. And the war room looks something like this. I think I was a PM, so I was there. I brought 3 of my best engineers. We had a number of managers. I got the luxury of sitting next to the CTO for the duration of this 2-day period in which we tried to figure out what was going on. So long story short, what happened? In this specific scenario, we won't go into too much depth, one of those caches that I was talking about got out of sync with the others. It happened to be one, unfortunately, that was on the West Coast and happens to be where Google's located. And it happens to be where their crawlers were crawling from. And when they came to our website, they saw a different number for that couch that I was talking about than we were telling them about. And unfortunately, through a series of miscommunications, rather than giving us a chance to fix it, they just blacklisted our entire operation. This is a company that spends hundreds of millions of dollars with Google to put these ads on. They shut it off. And as a result, that top of funnel immediately shrunk and the revenue took a nosedive. It took us something like 72 hours to figure that out and figure out where this problem was happening. And ultimately, the actual resolution, so ultimately what happened, these are PLAs for anyone that's seen them. The PLAs were gone for about a day and a half. They came back. And the resolution was simple. It was, once we figured it out, the cache had to be refreshed and get that new data in there. And the new price came in and the crawlers worked again. No big deal. But it took a long time to figure that out. So stepping back for a second and thinking about, okay, what did we just learn from that? What would that process look like? It looks something like this. This is a sort of a common incident management process where you have preparation on the far left, detection, containment, eradication, recovery. That's that part I was just talking about with that refreshing of the cache. And then hopefully some sort of post-mort where you do something about it afterwards. Unfortunately, at the organization I worked at, I'd say we got very good at these 2 steps. And we're gonna trademark this. I'm joined by my marketing guy, Dan, in the back there. We're gonna trademark this, the doom loop, we're calling it. We got very good at these 2 steps. We would get that war room going. We'd get people into that war room. We'd find that problem. We'd fix it and we'd high five and when we'd leave. And I think a lot of companies get good at these 2 steps. But in my opinion, the path to a better story, a path to prevention is really thinking about more than that period in which you're in the war room, more than that period in which you've identified a problem, you've gotten people to the table and you fixed that problem. This stat I pulled off the internet, I don't know where from, but 81% of companies claim that same problem that happened reoccurs at some point later because of the fact that you focus so much on those middle 2 steps and so little on those external 2 steps. So why, I guess, is the question. And hopefully we can dig into this a little bit. Why is it so hard to break out of that doom loop? Does that resonate with people? Anyone else been in this doom loop before? Yeah. So why is it so hard? I'm going to go through a couple of reasons. Reason number 1 is our day jobs. You leave that war room, you go back to your desk and you've been away for 2 days. You get that sprint that's supposed to finish on Friday. You've done none of it. You've got those commitments you made for the quarter that are now behind. Your day job gets in the way. I'm not going to presume to have answers to this one. It's the only one I'm going to skip over. This is just life, I think, in the corporate world. This is not changing. But what else? It's interesting. In the incident management process, oftentimes the most manual part of your entire DevOps or IT ops workflows is the incident management process. If you look at the life of an incident, for example, here we go from an observability platform on the left that identifies a problem, or a human, in our situation, the CFO, coming in through some sort of ticketing system. You got PagerDuty or some sort of tool that identifies that something that lets people know something's happening. You bring people to the war room. At that point, that icon of the incident commander, you're now in a situation where you have very little tech. I can speaking specifically for where I came from. We would walk in the room, there'd be Google spreadsheets going, there'd be people on text message. There was the most limited amount of technology empowerment was for one of the most critical roles in an organization. If you think about what the incident commander is called on to do in that 72-hour period, it's a wild amount of action. You have them paging and getting people to the table. You have them running postmorts. You have them putting together playbooks so that they get better at next time. You have all those tasks that come out of an incident. You have the stakeholder communications. We use a joke in IT that you can you come to me with a problem, I can either fix it or give you a status update on it. And the answer to that is usually you need to do both of those things at the same time. So that the incident commander is the person who is called on to do that and let executives know what's happening during these incidents. So I would argue that one of the most critical parts of the whole process, it has the most limited amount of technology at most companies. But what else? Even if you have the technology to deal with these sorts of situations, oftentimes once you walk out of that war room, you immediately lose visibility because you're right back to all those different silos we talked about in the beginning. If you look at, for example, I attempted to put together from my memory, this was like 5 years ago, at least, it was 6 years ago, all the post-mort actions that came out of, we had this great post-mortem. We all came together 2 days later and the CTO told us how great we'd done and it would never happen again. And we came up with this list of 30 different things that each team was going to go off and fix so that we were better next time, better logging. We were going to replace that crappy cache that kept breaking. We had a slew of action items coming out of those postmortems. What happens to these items when you leave that war room? At least at the company I was at, they sat in Confluence checklists on some Confluence page that no one on our team ever even looked at, except for that one person that happened to be in the postmortem. So it's a lot of problems. I've only shared problems with you so far for the most part. I do want to pivot and talk a little about solutions and how to think about this space. What are some of those solutions? What can we do about it? I think one, and this is supposed to be a little bit of a joke, because we can learn from our mistakes, right? We're good at that. Address our strengths and weaknesses and reflect and be better. That's great. I think that's good. I think partly just recognizing that becoming good at that doom loop is not good enough and thinking about how do I prepare for this for next time? How do I make my systems more resilient so I don't get in the war room? How do I actually take action on those incident action items afterwards? I think that is actually a really good step. Just simply understanding that, I would say, is a good step forward. I also have to talk about better technology. That's why I'm here. That's why Zerent is here. That's why we bought ZenDuty. We believe that better technology is really the path to a broader solution to these problems. And we've tried to do exactly that at Zerent. So you remember this slide from a moment ago, that sort of incident path through an organization. The way we've positioned our portfolio of products and where we're thinking about why they make so much sense together is that with our platform, with the combination of an ITSM system that the IT team is already using and has been using for years, combining that with an incident management system, because guess who's running the incidents most of the time? It's the IT team. Giving them the tools to give a developer a system in which they can compile a playbook so that when they come in, I can remember walking into the war room multiple times. This wasn't the only incident I was involved with. I can remember walking in and the incident commander would say, all right, you guys have your playbook? What step are you on? And I can remember looking at the PM next to me and being like, do you remember where that playbook is? And pulling it up and being like, and just basically rewriting it every time we walk into that room. ZenDuty gives you the ability to build playbooks before you walk into the incident commander's room. It also gives you the ability to obviously just to page and to escalate everything about alerting and getting people there. So really helping you. You do need to get good at the war room, despite the fact I called it a doom loop. You do need to get good at it. And then last but not least, as you exit that war room, that list of postmortem items that I talked about, actually sending them out to a platform, whether it's the ITSM or perhaps wherever your developers are operating in, we can integrate with those tools as well, getting those postmortem items into the system of record so they become first-class citizens next to all the other work on your team's plate. In addition to those two, we also have the third piece of this puzzle that we acquired last year as we developed this position is a tool called StatusCast. StatusCast is a tool very similar to a Jira status page. So again, another tool in the toolkit for the incident commander to let people know there's a problem. StatusCast is a tool for internal and external status pages. So you can say, hey, your executive is constantly bothering you about the state of the problem. You can just give them a link to the website and they can come and in real time get their own information, self-serve the state of these incidents. So we believe that just this portfolio together helps you not only get better at that incident period, but also actually develop those first and last pieces of the puzzle that will get you out of that doom loop. So we're calling it obviously the Zerent platform, and we believe it's the complete incident management offering. Each of these tools has a bunch of different capabilities that I'm happy to talk about. Dan and I will be here for the rest of the day. Each of these tools are obviously in use individually, but it's the combination of them together that we are most excited about. So what I'll leave you with is the real impact of incidents and why I think this is so important to think about and take back to your organizations. This is a stat from Gartner. Maybe people have seen it. It's a popular one out there. But IT downtime is estimated to cost $5,600 a minute. At the company I was at, I can tell you firsthand that outage I described was a multi-million dollar problem for that organization. So having these tools in place will bring real impact to your organization through fewer downtimes, through the lower cost of that downtime, faster and more efficient handling of incidents when they happen, and hopefully the ability for you to exit that doom loop. All right. Thank you guys very much.